and welcome to the Energy Connect studio at Future Energy Asia 2023. I'm delighted to have sitting next to me Julien Perez, VP Strategy and Policy at the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, OGCI. Thank you so much for joining me, Julien.
Thank you so much, Julian, as well, for welcoming me.
Why is it so important to reduce methane?
So, methane emission is a very potent greenhouse gas. It has a global warming potential that is much higher than the CO2 emission. But the beauty of it is that it has a very short lifetime in the atmosphere. So if you reduce the flow of emission going into the atmosphere, then you can reduce the stock that is inside the atmosphere, and so reduce the global warming effect that is produced by methane. And what science is telling us is that the methane, like the global methane emissions that have occurred for the last few decades, is certainly responsible for 0.5 degrees of the global warming that we're experiencing already today. So it's a significant opportunity to act on climate change by reducing the methane emission.
Yeah, and in your viewpoint, is enough being done by companies? And then what are you, as an organization, trying to get industry players together to reduce their emissions?
So the first thing is to understand, methane emission sources. There's multiple sources of methane emissions. Oil and gas industry is a significant contributor to the methane emissions, but it's not the only one. There's other sources. However, what's important for the oil and gas industry is it has the capacity to resolve its challenge in a very short time frame. And actually what we have observed is that in the last few years there's been a proliferation of new technology that has been scaled up from the detection phase, so satellite for instance, with the monitoring as well, so using planes and drones and camera, but also the mitigation actions, so how to reduce the methane emission by itself. So while I think some time ago there was difficulty to really appreciate what was the scale of the challenge of the methane emission, now the technology allows us to address it in a much more meaningful way. And if you look at the direct emission from the industry, from the oil and gas industry, this is roughly 4 to 5 gigaton of CO2 equivalent, depending on the estimation that are made. Half of it is coming from methane. So half of the challenge of the direct emission of the industry could be resolved very quickly thanks to the technology that have been scaled up recently.
It's really interesting here, Julien. And how important is CCUS then as part of the technologies that can be used?
So you address different type of emissions when it comes to CCUS. On the methane, you're addressing leakage, for instance, and which are a little bit diffuse across different facilities. For CCUS, you would have to have a much more higher concentrated CO2 stream. So generally, you put the units at the stack of an industrial plant. So it's not the same type of emissions, and most of the time the CCUS have to be relatively large projects. So you capture multiple sources of CO2 emission at the same plant. So you could have a cement plant and a steel plant and a fertilizer, a refinery, all of them located in the same geographical perimeter, where one big CCUS project could make sense and could resolve a significant portion as well of their CO2 emission. But the two could live together.
That's interesting. Can you just talk a little bit more about the methane monitoring program you worked on in Iraq? I'd like to hear more about it.
Sure. So OGCI, when it has been launched at the UN Climate Summit in 2014, as part of its DNA is to engage the industry to reduce its carbon footprint and to engage into decarbonizing the solution that they provide to the market. So that's the DNA of OGCI. And in September 2021, we announced a new strategy where all the member companies of OGCI signed up to. One of the goals was to get to net zero on their scope 1 and 2 emissions, so their direct emission, on their operated assets, but also to try to do the same on the non-operated assets, which include engaging with the rest of the industry. And so the satellite program that we have run in Iraq is exactly about that, is engaging companies that are outside of OGCI member, but that have a significant greenhouse gas emission issue and would need to get an access to certain type of technology. So when it comes to methane emissions, it happens that we know from estimation and from the models that some countries contribute significantly to the methane challenge. One of those countries is Iraq, and what we wanted to do is to make awareness raising. So because people who are running installation in Iraq or any place in the world want to run their installation properly. Nobody wants to emit methane emission for the joy of emitting methane emission. You emit because you have a lack of awareness or because you have an issue on your installation. So what we did is that we run a satellite monitoring campaign targeting some specific assets in Iraq, getting real data about where the leakage is happening, because the satellite we were using were very high precision. It was GGSat, working as well with carbon limits, which help us to make the engagement phase. The program was not a name and shame, clearly not. The idea was to engage with the local operator, inform them about that they have a methane leakage happening in the specific place in their assets, and collaborate with them and say, okay, how can we resolve this? So it was cost-free for the local operator, and it has resolved significant methane emissions. Some of them were multiple tons per hour at a cost that was ridiculously low. So we're quite happy with the success of this program, and we're expanding it to new countries now. So in Kazakhstan, Algeria, and Egypt in particular.
That's really interesting to hear. And you just mentioned there about collaboration or bringing the industry together. This project sort of shows what can be done if you can go in and bring everyone together and talk about the technology and what's available.
Absolutely. This was key. I mean, for Iraq, the collaboration was like a fundamental piece of the success of the program. It was not only about data acquisition, but it was also about gaining trust, because it's never easy when someone is looking above your shoulder and say, hey, you have an issue here. But if you create the space where people feel that you're here to act on the right direction, and you're not here to name and shame again, but really to resolve a climate challenge, that has been again one of the fundamental pieces, and we want to keep that component in the other countries that we want to address. And I would say, more globally speaking, within OGCI, that's the purpose of OGCI. When you think about it, we work very closely with 12 companies. They are and their CEOs. So the leadership of OGCI is the 12 CEOs of the 12 member companies. And when you think about it, those are competitors ultimately. I mean, they're all playing in the same market, in the energy market. But still, they understand that some of the challenge they face will not be resolved by the sum of individual actions, but has to be resolved by, like the synergies that could be created by putting together such a coalition. So, yeah, collaboration is absolutely key. This was like, or let's say, horizontal collaboration. Of course, you need vertical collaboration with the supplier and the customer. We do that on the transport, for instance, on the marine transport. It's another topic. On CCUS, the same thing. There's so many things that could be accelerated through collaboration.
Well, Julian, really interesting to hear that. And just before we go, we're here in Bangkok. What's important is having a show that covers the whole energy value chain here in Asia.
So well, first of all, it's a very vibrant part of the world in terms of economy, in terms of population. So it's always very interesting for us to hear and learn what's going on in Asia, because then we can take it back as well to our member companies in Europe and the US and explain, this is what's happening. We have through the member companies of OGCI a strong exposure, obviously, in Asia. But also we've done some significant work mainly on the CCUS space. Trying to identify industrial hub that could be decarbonized thanks to carbon capture and sequestration. And this is something that we've identified, like Southeast Asia, to be a very, very high potential areas for carbon capture and storage. So that was one of the things that I wanted to share with the community here. And the other thing was making a call for actions on when it comes to methane emission, as we explored together. A year ago, we launched a new initiative that was calling Aiming for Zero Methane Emission. And the idea was to switch the mindset of the industry and say, okay, let's treat methane emission as seriously as this industry has been treating safety or oil spills. So you aim for zero. You may not get to zero because incidents happen. You have to maintain the integrity of your assets, but at least you put everything in place to get as close as possible to zero. As you do for safety, as you do for oil spills, we want to do that for methane. And since the launch, we have now 80 companies who have joined. So it's quite successful, and I'm hoping that more Asian partners could join the efforts.
Well, that's really good to hear, Julien. And I just want to thank you for coming down to the Energy Connect studio.
Thank you so much. Thank you for welcoming me.
Thanks everyone for watching, and I look forward to bringing you more studio interviews from the show floor in the coming days.